Welcome to Issues and Answers with Diane Kinderwater. Issues and Answers is presented as a public service to New Mexicans by State Employees Credit Union, who have been proudly serving the families of New Mexico locally and abroad since 1958. State Employees Credit Union is ready to help you and your family with all your financial goals. And now, Issues and Answers with Diane Kinderwater.
Welcome to the program. I'm Diane Kinderwater. It's a topic I don't really like talking about, but we talk about it a lot here in Issues and Answers, and that is the growing crime problem in our favorite city in Albuquerque. What can be done about it? Why is it happening? We've got even the feds coming in. We have Operation Legends that's been expanded to include Albuquerque. We're in with other notable cities such as Kansas City, Chicago, and Albuquerque. We're the ones needing the feds' help. We're going to discuss a recent arrest that might be affected by Operation Legend and what kind of impact that is having on our city and other things that can happen to improve it. I have as my guest the author of Albuquerque Blues, Crime and Policing in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and the latest information that Joe Abbin has in his research about how New Mexico ranks, why so poorly, and what can be done about it. So please stay with us as we discuss Albuquerque Blues right after this. Perhaps it's you, perhaps it's your neighbor. Somebody has been affected by crime that seems to be just rampant in Albuquerque. On the program today, we're going to discuss what could be some solutions and what are the stats that rank us at the top of the worst lists. My guest is Joe Abbin. Thank you, Joe. He's a former chair of the Foothills Community Policing Council. Thanks for being a part of the program. And he is the author of Albuquerque Blues, Crime and Policing in Albuquerque, and he's done some updates on his stats in here. Before we get into this grim news, we'll just say, how are you?
Very good, Diane, and thank you so much for inviting me to come back again.
We're going to have you actually on two programs talking about the latest research that you've done. We're also going to discuss the Albuquerque Public Police Department Reserve Program, the future of it, and the Council on Racial Justice, and of course this Operation Legend. Let's start with that. Operation Legend, just this summer, the Trump administration announced that the FBI, it is the DEA, ATF, the U.S. Marshals are here in Albuquerque helping solve our crime problem.
They've always been here, Diane, but in the beginning of July, Attorney General Barr stepped up the action with over 1,000 new agents total across the country, another $80 million in grants to police departments, and they're focusing on 9 cities, of which Albuquerque is one of those cities. And we started getting additional agents, 35 of them, in the end of July, roughly. And they're, as you pointed out, they're DEA, they're FBI, they're
ATF,
alcohol,
that's
tobacco, and firearms, and the U.S. Marshals. And those people have been here to some extent for years. In fact, we've, as part of my time on the police department, we relied heavily in many cases on the FBI's crime lab, for instance. And the U.S. Marshals, their primary job and task is to go after the worst of the worst. And so I was part of several teams where we went out on what they call warrant sweeps to bring in these worst of the worst. And they were a joint venture between the Albuquerque Police Department, usually it's 2 officers, and teamed up with 2 U.S. Marshals, and we go knocking on doors, bringing in the bad guys.
You did back then, you were a reserve officer with APD. Back
That's
then,
correct.
You worked with the FBI.
Yes,
Really?
we worked with the FBI.
Explain again a little bit of the process that you would do.
Well, it was primarily...
you said the worst of the worst.
The U.S. Marshals, their job is to assist actually local and state law enforcement, and go as well as most wanted from the federal point of view too. And so they often worked with APD, and I was part of several operations with those U.S. Marshals. So they teamed up the U.S. Marshals and the APD officers, and we go out hunting bad guys. And
this was maybe somebody on the most wanted list. The
Absolutely,
FBI
right.
would get involved with that.
Right. We had our own lists, and then the FBI has their own list too.
Okay.
So they concentrate on those bank robbers and things like that, or federal crimes. But they're also turned out those same criminals are wanted locally for the chaos they cause, you know.
And more chaos.
And more chaos.
More chaos. So what is your feeling that Operation Legend was increased? We have 35 officers.
Well, 35, I'm not sure how that, because I never knew what that count was ahead of time. But I knew there's, you know, the FBI has a substantial sized building here, and some of my best friends are FBI agents. In fact, I was mentioning earlier before the show, I actually briefed the FBI on how we use their statistics, which they were kind of surprised on too. There hasn't been as good a communication between local law enforcement and federal. And part of what Operation Legend, and prior to that, Operation Relentless Pursuit, it was called, was to increase how the communication between the law enforcement agencies and get them to work together on the common problems.
I just mentioned on another show, just as we were taping this show, that allegedly the murder of Jackie V. Hill, who was shot in her driveway just 9 months ago, part of Operation Legend, they may have been an impact on finding her alleged murder. He was out of state, I think, in Texas, and they probably will be bringing him back, but that's something that just broke just recently, and I understand it was a person who was living here illegally from another country, and somebody who kept crossing the border, was breaking in, doing a lot of bad deals here in our state, in our city, but was released from jail and came back and eventually allegedly
Well, you just hit
murdered
on a lot of problems at one time. He shouldn't have been here in the first place, and then he shouldn't have been released after he was here. Operation Legend, by the way, was named after Legend, who was a 4-year-old black boy that was killed, totally innocent.
I think sleeping in his bed, right? Sleeping in his bed.
Yeah, he had no connection with crime that we know of anyway. And,
Not a 5-year-old, not a 5-year-old.
Yeah, not. And that was
that was Kansas City.
Yeah, and they just recently solved that crime, or at least they have a suspect that's been identified and arrested for that crime. And that was a tough one. Some of these that are random shootings are apparently random, or they don't. It's hard to make the connections with how these things might have happened. And unfortunately, a lot of the gang members, they give messages to each other, like shooting in a house. Well, those are difficult to identify, those perpetrators, because they're never face to face.
So that was in Kansas City. I didn't realize they found perhaps his alleged murder as well. But that's where I think President Trump named it after the little boy, and his first name was Legend.
Yeah, it was capital L, little e, and then capital G. But
how long do we think the FBI? Well, the FBI is here. The U.S. Marshals, DEA, ATF, these additional officers will be in Albuquerque.
That's a good question. As it's for now, it's free help. It depends. And
free help that our taxpayers pay, that we are all paying for these people. But it was William Barr who announced that this past July 22nd that we're getting this extra help.
And a lot of people felt that was a political stunt by Donald Trump and the Department of Justice. And I don't know if it was or not, but we can't pass it up. We get expert help. We're in such sad shape in Albuquerque. Our clearance rate on homicides within the police department is just a little over 50%. It used to be 80%.
And that's what you brought on our program today. We had you in the past as the officer, the author of Albuquerque Blues.
Right.
What is the problem? But you've done some research again using the statistics. And one of your first slides that you brought us is that Albuquerque Violent Crime Index. You're saying these are figures from 2018. Those are the most recent. You had a complete year. We're in 2020 now, but 2018 was a complete year. Albuquerque averages 370% of the national average crimes per 10,000 people. Violent crime.
Yeah,
violent.
100,000 per 100,000.
Per 100,000.
That's what
people.
the index is, right?
So, and I'm looking at the graph. It's going up from 2012 to 2018. The red line. 370% of the national average. Tell me, what does that mean, Joe Abbin? What does that mean?
It's huge. New Mexico and Albuquerque have never really been very good. For the last 60 years, we've been in the top 20 in violent crime in the United States. For the last 10 years, we've been in the top, or the last 26 years, we've been in the top 10, and we've been in the top 5 for the last 9 years. So, but it's gotten noticeably worse, and that's slide 2 that I have on there. We're putting along, I think, Diane, around 2013, 2014. We were twice the national average for violent crime. And of course, New Mexico is also quite a bit above the national average, but that's driven primarily by Albuquerque.
Albuquerque, with the
right.
largest city.
And then you could, on that slide, you can see the crime slowly increased in 17 and 18 is huge.
Yeah, big jump from 16 to 17 and 18.
Right, and in that
Is that when we had the constitutional amendment? What changed?
Constitutional Amendment 1 was part of that. Because it affected the
releasing of the judges being able to bail.
Reform, they call it.
But what happened between 16 and 17?
Well, 16 and 17 was, 16 was the constitutional amendment, as I recall. That was one of the things. And then we had another, there's failures on the part of all the legs of the criminal justice system in New Mexico. And one of them is our own Metropolitan Detention Center. Around that time we had, and in fact for almost 20 years now, more than 20 years, the Metropolitan Detention Center has been under a consent decree of their own with the Department of Justice because they were doing such a poor job of record keeping. They have a thing called a McClendon decree, and where that originated was poor Billy McClendon was in jail at the MDC for 3 years, and before anybody discovered him even, and they didn't know why he was there, and unfortunately Billy was mentally challenged, and he was happy in there. But they thought, well, that's a poor system where you can have somebody that they don't know what he's charged with or when he's due to come to trial for 3 years. And the Department of Justice went after our own correctional system here to fix their overcrowding, for one thing. That was a problem at the time, and to fix their record keeping for another thing. Obviously, it's wrong if prisoners get lost in the system. Most prisoners are quite aware of where they are in the system. So there's several things that happened, and then in 2016 they really started cracking down out there, and we on the police department were not doing as many arrests, and we were letting more out when they get there. And the judges were releasing them without bond. That Constitutional Amendment 1.
Yeah, the New Mexico Constitutional Amendment 1 was 2016 with rules enabling judges to release most criminals with no bond. It was their discretion. You're saying most.
It's always been in their discretion to a large part. And the judges, to me, have used an excuse that their hands are tied. I don't see that they have been. But this thing, there's several things that argue against bond and bail, is that you shouldn't have to pay for justice. So you don't get out of jail unless you have the money. And that doesn't seem right. But it also doesn't seem right that you cut them loose with no bond and no bail. And guess what happens? They don't show. And in the city...
They don't show up to court.
Right.
Where they could be sentenced to jail or prison if they were.
Right.
If they were, that's why they don't show back up.
That's correct. And it doesn't make much of an impression on them if you don't keep them in jail, at least overnight. And in many cases, for quite some time now, we've been in the mode in the police department of don't arrest, don't pursue in general, unless it's egregious crimes.
Now, why do you say that?
Well,
how do you say that?
There's a lot of reasons. This is like a many-headed snake here. The city, of course, has been under this court-approved settlement agreement since roughly 2015. It started the end of 2014, And we were in trouble because that police force, according to the Department of Justice, had a culture of aggression where we had unnecessary use of force and too many people killed in wrongful deaths. In fact, prior to 2015, the city paid out over $70 million in wrongful death claims and excessive use of force. So
this was even before George Floyd in Minneapolis.
quite a bit
Albuquerque.
before George Floyd.
They're not even talking about. They weren't. I mean, they've talked about Albuquerque. We've had our share of national spotlight because of aggressive force, but
absolutely. And in fact, there are some 13 cities, I believe, that are under these Department of Justice consent decrees, and most of them are for excessive use of force, including Seattle, of all places.
Well, they're rioting there without any protection.
They quit using excessive force, all right.
Yeah, there's no. It seems like the rioters have taken control. Does it seem to you the criminals have taken control of Albuquerque?
Absolutely. You know, I believe criminals should have due process, but I think a lot of our empathy is misplaced. We have seemingly no empathy for the general public, and our empathy is directed toward making sure that the criminals get a square deal. I think we can do both. There's no reason why.
You show that, I'm not sure if this research came from the FBI. You said that you use the FBI statistics.
Right. I think they're the gold standard.
To share that information with the FBI. You've been giving some, before this COVID hit, going around the community and giving some presentations using FBI statistics, and we have those statistics here.
Right.
But you're giving it to the FBI as well?
Well, the FBI, of course, the FBI doesn't have a drone flying around auditing APD. So the FBI.
And you do? You do?
I should. I thought about that. You know, the FBI gets their statistics actually from the cities that. So they get them from APD. And one of the problems we had in 2018 was the statistics that the city provided to the FBI didn't mesh with the statistics that the city gave to you and I in the Albuquerque Journal, for instance. They were, I hate to use the term cook in the books, rather because I'm not prepared to say that it was intentional or accidental or all the other excuses that the city had for why the statistics didn't match. So I use the FBI statistics as the gold standard because they're subject to audit, and there's severe fines for the city if they misrepresent, underreport, or in other words, doctor the books. Now, just as an aside, 2019 statistics won't be released until the end of September. So that's why you don't see my research going any higher than that.
You shows that half of the crimes are not reported. You say, why are not criminals in jail? Why aren't they? Why are they on the street? But you're saying half of the crimes aren't reported by victims.
That would be my experience from the police department. One of the overriding things, Richard Nixon made a little joke. It's really not that funny, but the cause of crime is criminals, so we have too many criminals on the street. That's probably one of my major themes. For whatever reason, there's too many criminals on the street committing crimes, and so I listed several reasons there.
Well, you said
I mentioned half the crimes are not reported. Because for a variety of reasons. For instance,
it's a family member that perhaps is committing the
yes,
crime.
the first auto theft that I was involved in, where we recovered the vehicle, it was stolen by the owner's daughter.
Oh, daughter, not the son. Not the son, as I was thinking.
Normally
okay.
it's the males that commit most of the crime, as you know.
So they chose not to prosecute their own daughter, but that's why you're saying.
And they're embarrassed to do it.
Yeah.
And a lot of rapes go on. I would say that maybe half the rapes are not reported because there's some kind of date rape, or there's a relationship between the participants, let's say. And I was in Albertsons. This sounds terrible, but in right before the end of last year, and we had shoplifters going in there, which is not unusual. It's a huge problem amongst retail stores, grocery stores, liquor stores particularly. And anyway, when I alerted the manager, I said, "There's something funny about this fellow, and he's over there loading up liquor bottles in his basket, nothing else, and including taking liquor bottles out of the boxes. These are the expensive $100 bottles." And she thanked me, and I went about my shopping, and I thought about that later. I did not slept very well about that. But as I'm coming around the corner to go to the cashier, here comes our shoplifter with his basket. And 3 gals at Albertsons stepped in front of him and told him, "Hand it over." He not only didn't hand it over, he lifts up his shirt and pulls out a .45, and I can't tell you exactly what he said, but it was the notion was for those gals to get out of his way. So that went from a shoplifter.
You witnessed that.
I witnessed that. So the gals moved out of the way, and that went from a shoplifting to an armed robbery. Because
what happened in that case? Police were called?
No. Of all things, afterwards, I asked the manager, and I said, "Do you need a witness?" Or she says, "No." And she, in fact, informed me they were not going to call the police. And I said, "Why?" She says, "Because they won't be here for another 2 or 3 hours. Our store closes at 11 o'clock. This was 9 o'clock. We're not going to wait around for them. And they don't do anything about it anyway." And that's just her opinion, mind you. But the idea of not, and I told her, I think she should report it if nothing else, because otherwise the police don't know how to deploy their resources if they don't know where the crime's occurring. So they may not have much hope about recovering merchandise, or
correct.
Or they
so
may
what was the final result?
I don't know.
Could you have, as a citizen, called and reported it?
Yes, I could have. But since I wasn't the victim, I don't have much clout. The victim is the one that I was a witness. That's true.
But you know,
and then I wondered what would happen if I had been armed. Now, if I'd have got the call and I was on duty, we would have let the robber exit the store and then confront him, so you don't initiate a
shootout inside
the shootout inside the store, or
a
hostage situation. And then I thought, well, what if and I was not armed at the time. I said, no, I still don't think I'd interfere, because it could have still would have initiated a shootout in the store, and who knows who would have been injured.
So
I felt bad about that. That's one of those things. I had another shoplifting where I interfered. The shoplifter was running out the door. The staff was at the same Albertsons, by the way. And when he came by me, he jumped on a bicycle. And when he came by, I just gave him a kick. And he was unstable anyway, because he's trying to get going. And that had another ending, but he also wasn't armed either.
You know, that actually just brings to mind, I was at a store in the evening, just one cashier at the register, and a gentleman had all these food items in his hands, and he just walked out.
Yeah.
And I was kind of in shock, saying, he just walked out. I thought he was going to get in line behind me to pay at the register. Mm-hmm. So for the two of us, we've both witnessed this. This must be rampant. I mean, they just walked out with no repercussion.
It's
like,
common.
yeah, they said it happens all the time.
And most of the stores, they are asked not to interfere or to take over, because chances of injury, and that's always been a problem, you know. But it seems like it's worse than ever. We used to have substations in some of the 7-Elevens for that reason, just some police presence.
You also have brought us a slide. How do we compare with our neighbors and the rest of the United States? Again, these are from statistics 2018 violent crime rates, the FBI statistics showing Albuquerque. Our rate is under Detroit, Memphis, Baltimore.
Yeah, we are 4th in the nation in violent crime as of 2018. And
I heard we're 2nd, so that might be
2019. The second, you know, it depends on what database you're using.
Again, Detroit, Memphis, Baltimore, Albuquerque.
And we're worse than Chicago, if you notice on that chart. That's slide 4. We're worse than Chicago, and I do believe for 2019, the estimates will be that our violent crime index will be down about 15%, but we'll still, depending on how much progress Chicago has made, which doesn't look like very much, we'll still be worse than Chicago at the end of 2019 statistics.
And our bigger cities in our area They're larger, and this is per capita, but they're doing much better than us, would be Phoenix, Los Angeles, Colorado Springs, New York City.
New York City built itself a year and a half ago. We had the state, the police commissioner, O'Neill was his last name, good Irishman, was bragging about how safe New York City was. And you see by those stats in 2018, they were very safe compared to a lot of places. And in the national averages on there, we're as we pointed out earlier, we're 4 times the national average roughly. And you see that the other cities around us, Denver, Phoenix,
El Paso,
El Paso.
Scottsdale.
Yeah, people say, well, that El Paso,
that's
it's
a
got to
safe
be a
city.
pit. It's right on the border. It's
No,
got 2
it's
interstates, 2 major drug routes. But no, they're not. They're quite a bit different than we are, as we see there. And in fact, you know, there's some interesting things hidden in the statistics that if you look in just New Mexico, 2 of the safest places in New Mexico border Albuquerque, Corrales, for instance, Edgewood. Blend's not so hot. But it is interesting how bad we are in Albuquerque. And the biggest cities tend to be the worst in any state because the criminals are drawn there. They have more victims there.
And they can be hidden easily.
And they have more places to hide.
Yeah.
And they get more free stuff. They can exist on the system.
Joe, we're going to have you back for another program as we discuss the Reserve Officer Program and why we don't have it any longer and what's the future could be. And also, I know you had some more statistics that you brought about us. And again, sorry, we're just the messengers about all this information.
Oh,
to
no,
bring you
I
bad
appreciate
news.
the opportunity. Most
Okay.
people, as you pointed out at the beginning, they don't want to hear this.
I don't want to talk about it. We'll talk about it more in our next show. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Issues and Answers with Diane Kinderwater is presented as a public service to New Mexicans by State Employees Credit Union, which has proudly been serving the families in New Mexico locally and abroad since 1958. State Employees Credit Union is ready to help you and your family with all your financial goals and is the exclusive sponsor of Issues and Answers with Diane Kinderwater in order to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. To comment on today's program or to purchase a DVD copy of any Issues and Answers program, visit sunbroadcasting.org or call us at 505-345-1991.